The conference room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning hum. My husband's attorney, a man named Garrett, the kind of man who owned 3 suits in the same shade of charcoal, leaned back in his chair and smiled at me the way people smile when they've already decided the outcome. My husband, Todd, sat beside him with his arms crossed, that familiar look on his face. The one I'd seen for 22 years. The one that said, "You don't know what you're doing." Todd's attorney slid a document across the table. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, "your husband is proposing a very fair settlement. Given the financial records," he tapped the paper, "and the trajectory of your contributions to the household over the past 2 decades, I think you'll find this more than reasonable." Todd didn't say anything. He just watched me. I looked at the document. I took my time reading it. Then I set it down, folded my hands on the table and said, "I'd like to present something first." Garrett's smile didn't move. Of course. I opened my folder. I slid one sheet across the table. Todd's attorney looked at it. He stopped smiling. He said, "Your Honor," and then caught himself, because we weren't in a courtroom. We were in a conference room in downtown Phoenix. But his hand moved to his jacket pocket the way people reach for their phone when they need a moment to think. Todd leaned forward to look. He stopped talking mid-breath, and I waited. Not because I'd won. Not yet. But because I had learned, over 22 years of being underestimated by the man sitting across from me, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply let the truth enter the room and give it a moment to breathe. I need to go back. Because if I just start from that conference room, none of it makes sense. I grew up in Tucson, the second of 3 kids. My father was an electrician. My mother kept the books for his small business out of a spiral notebook on the kitchen counter. I watched her do that my whole childhood. Add columns, cross-reference receipts, flag discrepancies before my dad even knew they existed. She never had a degree. She never talked about what she did as anything special. She just did it. And the business ran. That's probably where I got it from. I went to University of Arizona on a partial scholarship, studied accounting, not because it was glamorous. It is not glamorous, but because I understood numbers the way some people understand music. They made sense to me. They told stories. A balance sheet is just a biography of decisions. I graduated in 1993, got my CPA license 2 years later, and started working for a mid-size firm in Scottsdale. I was good at it. My clients were mostly small business owners, some of them individuals with complicated estates. I built a reputation slowly, the way you build anything that lasts, carefully, without shortcuts. I met Todd at a friend's birthday party in 1998. He was charming. I want to be fair to the man I married, because for a long time he was genuinely charming. He laughed easily. He had opinions about things. He asked me questions and actually listened to the answers, at least in the beginning. He worked in commercial real estate and was good at it. He made more money than I did. That part mattered less to me than it seemed to matter to him, though I didn't understand that yet. We got married in 2001. We bought a house in Scottsdale. We had a daughter, Lily, and then a son, Owen. I reduced my hours at the firm for a few years while the kids were small, doing part-time consulting work from home, keeping a handful of clients. Todd said he appreciated that. He said it a lot in those years, actually. "I appreciate what you're doing for this family." Like he was issuing receipts. When Owen started first grade, I went back full-time. I rejoined my firm as a senior associate. Within 3 years, I was offered a partnership track. This is the part of the story where I have to tell you something that I didn't fully understand while it was happening. Todd didn't like it. He didn't say he didn't like it. He never said that plainly. What he said was things like, "You seem tired," or "I worry you're spreading yourself too thin," or, and this one came later, when I was already a full partner, "I just wonder if it's worth it, the hours you're putting in, when we don't really need the money. We don't really need the money." That sentence lived in our house like a piece of furniture. It came out at dinner parties when people asked about my work. It came out when I mentioned a difficult case I was working through. It came out quietly and often, as a reminder of what Todd believed to be true, that my career was optional, an accessory. Something I did because it filled my time, not because it was real, not because it mattered. Somewhere in the middle years of our marriage, he started calling what I did, your bookkeeping. Not accounting, not forensic work, not the partnership I had built. Bookkeeping. Like I was balancing someone's checkbook in the back of a diner. I corrected him once. He said he was joking. He said I was too sensitive. I stopped correcting him after that. This is a thing I notice now, looking back, the way erosion works. It doesn't happen in one conversation. It happens in 100 small ones, each one so minor that you'd feel foolish making a scene. So you don't. You absorb it. You tell yourself it doesn't matter. And then one day you look around and the version of yourself that existed before all those small conversations is someone you have to work to remember. I want to tell you about the Hardin case because it matters to what comes later. In 2014, I was asked to consult on a forensic accounting matter for a family out of Tempe. They were contesting their father's estate, a complicated situation involving a second wife, a small manufacturing business, and several years of financial records that didn't quite add up. It was exactly the kind of case I loved. Messy, detailed, requiring patience and a willingness to sit with numbers until they told you something. It took me 14 months to work through it. I found what I was looking for. A pattern of asset concealment, systematic and deliberate, going back almost a decade. The case went to probate litigation. My analysis was submitted as expert testimony. The estate was restructured. The children received what should have come to them. I never talked about that case at home. Client confidentiality, yes, but also, Todd didn't ask. He didn't ask about my work the way he used to in the beginning. Somewhere in the middle years of our marriage, my work had become something that happened elsewhere. Something that didn't quite make it through the front door of our house in Scottsdale. What I remember from that period is sitting at the kitchen table on a Saturday morning, going over notes for the Hardin case, and Todd coming in and saying, "Can you do that later? I thought we were going to the farmer's market." I said, "I'm in the middle of something." He looked at the papers on the table the way people look at something they find mildly irritating, but beneath the effort of a full conversation. He said, "Okay," and poured himself coffee and went to read in the other room. He went to the farmer's market without me. I finished my notes. I don't tell that story to make Todd the villain of every Saturday morning. I tell it because that Saturday was typical, and typical is where the real story lives, not in the dramatic moments, but in the pattern of ordinary ones. By 2019, we had been married 18 years. Lily was in college in California. Owen was in high school. The house in Scottsdale felt different than it had when we bought it. Not bad exactly, just different. Like a sweater you've worn so many times you can't remember what it felt like new. Todd and I had stopped having the same conversation. We'd had it so many times by then that we'd both given up on the idea that it would lead somewhere. He wanted me to scale back. I didn't want to scale back. He thought my work was something I did for myself, like a hobby with paperwork. I knew my work was part of who I was. We couldn't both be right. We'd agreed without ever actually agreeing to simply leave it alone. Then in early 2020, right before everything in the world became something else, he told me he thought we should separate. I wasn't surprised. I want to be honest here. I was sad, not devastated, not blindsided. Just sad in the way you're sad when something you've been watching decline for a long time finally stops. We tried 6 months of couples counseling. The therapist was a kind woman in a Tempe office who had clearly seen a great many marriages and was not surprised by ours. She asked questions. Todd talked about feeling like he wasn't a priority. I talked about feeling like I wasn't respected. We both said what we had come to say. Nothing shifted. We separated in the fall of 2020. The divorce proceedings began in early 2021. This is where Todd made a mistake. I don't think he meant to make it. I don't think he sat down one day and decided to be dishonest. But here is what I believe, having spent 22 years with this man and 14 months on the Hardin case, and 25 years reading financial documents. I believe Todd had come to believe his own version of our marriage. In his version, he was the provider. He was the one whose income had purchased the house, funded the vacations, made the life possible. My income was supplemental, appreciated but not essential. A contribution, not a cornerstone. This was not accurate. In 2021, when the financial disclosures were prepared, my income was slightly higher than Todd's. It had been higher for 6 of the previous 8 years. I had contributed, over the course of our marriage, not only to joint expenses but to a separate investment account, a thing I had started quietly in 2009. Because I understood compound interest, and because I had watched my mother keep her family's books in a spiral notebook, and I had made myself a promise that I would never not know exactly where I stood financially. Todd's attorney did not know about the investment account. Todd did not know about the investment account. He knew I had savings. He didn't know the scope of it, because I had handled my own finances the same way I handled everything. Carefully, without making a production of it. He had never asked, and I had never offered because it was mine, and because in 22 years of marriage, no one had ever suggested that being financially capable was something worth mentioning out loud. The document I slid across the conference table in downtown Phoenix was a one-page summary prepared by my attorney, a woman named Beverly, who had a small office in Tempe and the focused energy of someone who had seen exactly this situation more than once. It showed a full accounting of my contributions to the marriage, income, investments, the detailed record of every year I had spent building something that Todd had been calling bookkeeping for a decade. It also showed very clearly that the fair settlement Garrett had placed in front of me undervalued my contributions by approximately 40%. Todd's attorney looked at it for a long moment. Then he turned to Todd and said something quiet that I couldn't hear. Todd looked at the paper. He looked at me. He had the expression of a man who is searching for something familiar, a foothold, a frame he recognizes, and finding that the terrain has changed. He said, "Where did all this come from?" And I said, "It's been there the whole time. I need to tell you what was in that investment account, not to brag. I mean that. I'm not a person who talks about money in that way. I don't think it impresses anyone who matters, and I think it makes the wrong people pay attention. But I need to tell you because it's the part of the story that most people find surprising, and I think the surprise is itself the point. When I was 34 years old, I started putting money away in a brokerage account. Not every month, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on the year. I chose low-cost index funds because I am an accountant, and I do not believe in paying someone else to underperform the market on my behalf. I reinvested dividends. I didn't touch it. By 2021, that account held a little over $600,000. I tell you this not because the number is the story. The number is not the story. The story is that it existed at all, that I had built it quietly, consistently, over 17 years, without fanfare, without acknowledgement, without anyone in my house calling it anything other than her savings on the rare occasion it came up. The story is that I had built something real, and the person I had been married to for 22 years had spent a decade calling my career bookkeeping, and never once thought to ask what I was doing with the money I made from it. Beverly had prepared the summary document well. She had anticipated what Todd's attorney would try to argue, that the account was separate property, accumulated independently, not subject to equitable distribution. What she had documented was the degree to which my income had subsidized joint expenses during years when Todd's real estate commissions were inconsistent, which freed up his earnings to be invested in properties that he was now claiming as separate assets. It was, in the language of Arizona divorce law, a question of economic contribution. Garrett understood this immediately when he read the document. That was why his hand moved toward his jacket pocket. That was why he asked to step out with Todd for a few minutes. Beverly and I sat in the conference room and drank the mediocre coffee and did not say very much to each other. When they came back, Garrett's voice had a different quality, not softer exactly, but more careful, like a man picking his steps. "We'd like to request a brief recess to review the documentation," he said. Beverly said, "Of course." We reconvened 3 weeks later. I won't take you through every meeting, every exchange of paperwork, every phone call between attorneys. I'll just tell you this. The final settlement was not the one Todd had offered me in that first document. It was significantly different. Significantly fairer. I don't tell this story to anyone who asks what happened in my divorce. Most people who ask are expecting a different kind of story. One with more shouting, more betrayal, a clear villain and a clear victim. This one doesn't quite fit that shape. The truth is that Todd is not a monster. He is a man who told himself a story for 22 years and came to believe it completely. He believed he was the one who had built our life. He believed that what I did with my time and my education and my capability over 2 decades was supplemental, nice, not central. And the saddest thing, the thing I've had the most trouble sitting with, is that I let him believe it. Not actively. I didn't agree with him. I never stopped knowing what my work was worth. But I didn't fight it loudly enough. I let the small corrections slide. I let bookkeeping stand. I showed up year after year and did the work and assumed that someday it would speak for itself. Here's what I know now. It doesn't. Not automatically. Not without you standing in a conference room in downtown Phoenix and opening a folder. I am not angry at Todd the way I used to be, or the way I thought I would be. I went through anger. It was there, it was real, and I don't want to minimize it. But what I feel mostly now is something I can only describe as clarity. Like a room after someone opens all the windows. My daughter Lily called me when it was over. She knew the broad strokes but not the details. She said, "Mom, are you okay?" I told her I was. She said, "Did it go the way you hoped?" I thought about that for a moment. I thought about Garrett's hand moving toward his jacket pocket. I thought about Todd's face when he read the document. I thought about my mother's spiral notebook on the kitchen counter. All those columns of numbers, the business that ran because she made it run. "It went the way it needed to," I said. Lily was quiet for a second. Then she said, "You've been doing this for 30 years and he called it bookkeeping." "He did," I said. "And you never said anything." "I said something once," I said. "He told me I was too sensitive." Lily made a sound that I will leave to your imagination. My son Owen asked me, about a month after everything was settled, if I regretted waiting so long to put all the information out there. He's 17 and direct in the way that 17-year-olds are, which I admire even when it's uncomfortable. I thought about that question for longer than he probably expected. The honest answer is yes and no. Yes, because for too many years I allowed the version of me that existed in my own house to be a smaller version than the one that existed in my work, in my career, in the document trail I had been building since 1995. I accommodated an inaccurate story because challenging it felt like more trouble than it was worth. That was a mistake. No, because I'm not sure it would have mattered sooner. In a marriage, in a long one, truth presented too early sometimes just gets absorbed into the ongoing argument. You need the right moment, the right room, the right document, the right amount of distance. The conference room was the right room. I think what I want to say, the thing I've been circling around since I started telling you this, is something about the difference between being known and being seen. For 22 years, Todd knew me. He knew how I took my coffee, which side of the bed I slept on, what I sounded like when I was coming down with a cold, what I looked like when I was trying not to cry. He knew me. He just didn't see me. He didn't see what I was actually doing with my days and my years and my capabilities, and I made peace with that for a long time. I told myself it didn't matter, that what mattered was the work itself. But sitting in that conference room, watching his attorney's expression change, I understood something I probably should have understood sooner. It does matter. Not for the reasons ego would suggest. Not because you need to be praised, or celebrated, or impressive at dinner parties. It matters because the people who share your life should have an accurate picture of what your life actually is. You owe them that. They owe you that. The settlement was fair. I moved into a smaller place in Tempe, a condo with good light and a second bedroom I use as an office. Owen stays with me on weekends and Tuesday nights. Lily comes home for holidays and calls more than she used to. I still work. Of course I still work. I had a complicated estate case last fall that took me 4 months to unravel. The kind that requires patience and a willingness to sit with the numbers until they tell you something. They always do, if you give them time. I keep my files organized and my columns straight. The way my mother taught me without ever meaning to teach me. Out of a spiral notebook on a kitchen counter in Tucson. I understand what I have built and what it is worth. I don't need anyone else to call it by the right name anymore. But I know what it's called.